Hi, and welcome to the podcast Making Sense, brought to you by Navy Federal Credit Union. I'm your host, Emily Bigham, and each week I'll be taking your questions to the experts to help you make sense of your money, pun intended. And just for the audience who is just now tuning in, thank you so much for joining us on Making Sense. I am speaking with Jon Barton. Jon, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me over.
So while we're on the topic of service members transitioning out of service, tell us your story.
Yeah, I guess mine's more of the typical story, although it was about a decade ago and there weren't as many opportunities as there are now. But I was transitioning off reserve duty after a time on active duty. And the idea was, oh, wow, this should be pretty easy. I can, hang the uniform up, put the boots in the closet, and immediately start getting to work with this plethora of schools that I've been to and all this amazing training. And my focus in the Marine Corps was weapons. I mean, I was a weapons company, and I was an 0351 by trade, but then I'd gone on to develop my skills at division schools. And so I had all this amazing knowledge of weapons and weapon systems, which had absolutely zero credibility in the outside world, unless I wanted to be a gunsmith somewhere at some, random gun store. So I found that I was woefully inequipped to handle the working environment, and then went unemployed for a while, long enough to burn through anything I'd saved from my time on active duty. And so, yeah, it was tricky. So I dove in and went to my Rolodex to try to figure out who I knew that wore a uniform or I served with that might possibly be out in the civilian world. And I through some mutual friends and some random, universe intervention, I bumped into a sergeant major who I had heard about but had never served with, and he was working in the film and TV business. And he and I got into a conversation. We spoke a really long, amazing friendship, and through him, that opened doors in the film and TV world, and that's kind of where I maneuvered over into. But it had nothing to do with anything other than the fact I had been a really good Marine, and I knew a lot about guns. So it was funny how I was able to transfer skills that were completely inapplicable to the civilian world into something that was very sought after in the civilian world, but was an interesting career choice that had nothing to do with a day-to-day thing. It's Hollywood's this weird group, this fantasy world that people get into, and I would have never wanted to be anywhere near it. And happened chance and karma took over.
Sorry, I don't mean to jump in there, but I did want to ask you about, kind of this idea that the veterans are speaking a different language than the business leaders who might hire them. And, I have a stat here that says, like 2/3 of veterans feel that way. And after talking to you, it kind of sounds like that's maybe not the case, that there are a lot of transferable skills that veterans don't even know they have. Do you have any, tips maybe for resume building or what veterans should be looking for jobs?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that you should have an open mind, and I think you should look at your military experience, not just the specifics like your MOS and the schools you've been to, but look at it as a broad, package of managerial skills and troop leading skills that transition into leadership skills outside the civilian world. And that's always your first step. As we were in the military, we're trained leaders. So, the civilian world, especially in lower, middle, and upper management, they're looking for trained leaders more than anything else. I mean, they want people that can hit the ground running and grab people gravitate to them, and they're effective in their communication and their discipline in terms of how that relates to the bottom line for any particular company. And this is outside of whether or not vets want to go into business for themselves. So I think when I started working with vets with their resumes, when I started getting into mentorship, the hard part was saying, okay, look, this is you on paper, and this is great because we're taught in the Marine Corps to go through, our resume building as if we were taking all of our skills and applying them directly into a civilian resume for job sets. And that's fine. And some of that does translate over, and some of that does translate over into if you want to pursue a higher level degree. Some of our classes in schools do translate into college credits, and that can be translated into a degree in certain aspects, and certain colleges agree to that.
So you mentioned.
Go ahead. Yes.
I'm so sorry. I just had an idea that I really wanted to touch on. So You mentioned the fact that a lot of businesses are looking for trained leaders, and that's a quality that the military leaders who are transitioning have. I wonder if that's maybe sort of something having to do, and I don't want to say confidence because I don't think it's confidence. I think it's maybe that veterans need to understand the connection between the trained leaders that they are in the military and how that relates over to the trained leaders in the business world, because I think that there's a lot of things there that are similar, but it's difficult to understand if you've never been in the corporate setting. So do you encounter that ever, and how would you coach through that?
I do. I think what I have found it the most interesting is that, oddly enough, a lot of veterans coming off active duty or reserve duty that come into the corporate world, their first notion is to kind of be not meek, but they tend to hide behind some of their more robust communication skills. I've been in conference calls and meetings where veterans were present, and I never knew, because they were sitting and watching the room and anticipating and picking their targets and picking their battles to fight. And that's definitely a skill we're taught. But I think that more vets should embrace this idea that they were, trained communicators when they wore a uniform. They're trained in their abilities to communicate, succinctly think, and digest problems accurately, and come up with good solutions. And if you never communicate that in the corporate world, if you sit there and say, well, no one wants to hear from me, I'm just a vet, but I never went to business school, or I never did, that's doing yourself a disservice. And yes, there is a language barrier in the corporate side. They think and talk differently, but our world, as you translate in, it's not as hard as mixing oil and water. I believe it's like mixing two different colors of water, and what you come up with is a hybrid. And so, as a veteran, you look back to your basics, look back to your communication and your attention to detail, and then develop your style, your leadership style that you may have already had while you were in, or maybe it's a hybrid style that you're adapting to the corporate world. Now, of course, there are things you don't want to do. We got to keep our swearing down to a minimum, and I think we need to tone down any of our more robust rhetoric. But in the end, the skills that you learned, even going so far back as boot camp, are very applicable being a corporate leader.
So I'm reading your bio here, which is great, by the way. It's very long. You've done a lot of things. Congratulations. And there's a part.
Blessing and a curse.
There's a part. Right. So there's a part here that says that you encourage out-of-the-box Marine Corps style leadership principles. I'm so curious to hear about some of these out-of-the-box leadership principles.
Well, years ago I had someone refer to members of the Marine Corps as we're just the civilians' multi-tool, or the civilians' Leatherman. So there's so many different tools within our quiver that can be directly applied to how we, work in the corporate world, but also how we become veteran entrepreneurs. And I spent a lot of time in lessons learned, or what we call the asymmetric warfare school at division schools, and we talk about, well, if you have a hammer and an ice cube, well, you can easily beat the ice cube into submission, or there's different ways to let it melt, and there's different ways to utilize what it produces. And it's no different than if you're faced with some problem in the corporate setting. A veteran has to look at it and think, well, the easiest outcome might not be the best. The easiest solution might simply be, the hardest to communicate through in the civilian world. But I'm just trying to think of an analogy where we used our guerrilla warfare tactics in the civilian application, but there aren't any good ones.
Right.
But there was a saying that I heard at boot camp, and granted, I was in boot camp about 20 years ago. It was improvise, adapt, and overcome. And in essence, that's what asymmetric and counter-guerrilla warfare is. And so, I think vets can use their out-of-the-box thinking more in the civilian world to create different types of hybrid results than they ever could in the military. I mean, in the military, we're still, our background is still housed in a foundation of, discipline and specifics to our branch in MOS. Well, you can think in terms of, you don't have to think in your MOS, or you don't have to think in those specific structured terms when you're out in the corporate world. I mean, you have access to Google. There are many times in the field when I was setting up booby traps and doing cool stuff, I had no access to Google. And if I had, there were all kinds of really cool things I could have learned that we didn't teach in our regimented school system.
Kind of sounds like it's the process, right? So it's the process at which you problem solve. And can you repeat those three words one more time?
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.
I love that. That's great. That
and
sounds like.
Great term. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that it sounds like for any veterans that want to start a business, I know that's definitely a popular, career move for veterans. That would solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, beyond a doubt. Again, it goes back to this multi-tool concept where, you can be the military teaches you to just, mission accomplishment. And there are so many different methods to do this. And to complete the mission objective, we're armed with training, right? So there was this, another expression we learned when I was going through our martial arts training program, which was one mind, any weapon. And so, you can apply that to just anything you do as an entrepreneur, right? So if you have the head knowledge, if you can become a duty expert in what it is you want to accomplish, what the next amazing great thing you want to bring to the world is, and you just look at it like, how do I head think my way through this? And that's singly the most important tool that you have is your ability to think through the issue.
And improvise.
Adapt and overcome.
Yeah, I love that. So switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about resumes and how veterans can tailor their resumes to civilian positions to make their military experience applicable to a more corporate job.
Yeah, sure.
This is something that, you mentioned in a military personnel office that's applicable to human resources. I don't even know if maybe sometimes the terminology or the jargon used in the corporate world even registers if you haven't been in it.
I don't think it does either. And I think that, as I said, about a decade ago when I was first transitioning out, there was so few resources for veterans. And now, especially like with the tools that Navy Federal offers and the SBA offers, there's certainly more elements out there that can help guide and let veteran entrepreneurs prosper, which did not exist a decade ago. And it was much more difficult. But, the resume is tricky. So outside of the entrepreneur side of the fence, if you want to, do something amazing in the work environment, there are tons of opportunities. And so I want to draw back to my original story, which I talked about my friend who was the captain and who was the XO of 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. Well, he now has a master's degree in marketing, which he did his entire education on Camp Pendleton while he was on active duty. And he applied everything that he was learning and training into a civilian mindset, a corporate mindset, as he was going through these online schools and some, I think he did some in-course classes, but mainly it was online as he completed his degree. So he started learning the civilian terminology and adapting it to his resume early on. He took things like, of course, I've done the same thing. When I went to NCO school, that's just, an upper management certification course, right? So he looked at that and he said, well, I've done this training block as an officer, I've done this training block as an enlisted Marine, and I've done this training block, and those translate. So the corporate designations are these. And so he used any advanced school he went to, any leadership school he went to, and plugged it into the corporate, side of the fence. Now it's funny because he's been telling me that a lot of the corporate side, so many veterans have gone into the corporate workforce that they're actually changing terminology to reflect more the attitude of the incoming service member. And so it's easier for that side to know, okay, well, this person went to, non-commissioned officers course. So they can, we don't have to send them to a basic managerial position. They've already got the managerial leadership skills intact from the government. So, we can just send them to, something on our side that teaches them the basics of how we work.
What about the job environment? So we've talked a lot about the skills and how those are transferable,
Sure.
But is the job environment ever difficult?
Oh, it can be. I think now it's more difficult than I've ever seen it. It was pretty tough in around 2009, 10, right at the height of the recession. I think there was a lot of people just being very discouraged. Nobody was hiring. If you were an entrepreneur trying to get out there and get a product or service out there, nobody was funding. That was tough. I think it's really tough now because even in what's happening currently, if the banks are funding, if the credit lines are liquidable and you're able to get out there and let's say you want to start the next big company, we're still limited by social distancing. I live in Los Angeles. We just had a whole new series of stay-at-home orders put in effect. And so, this pandemic is really tricky for us. Outside of that, in times when, things are a little bit more successful and the economy is on an upturn, which I believe we're going to see here real soon, it's a dog-eat-dog world where the competition's really intense. And so you have to, navigate your way through a competitive corporate environment, much more so than now. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely some give and take. The environment, work, what's happening in the world, politics, they all interfere with how vets are getting out into the workforce.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing any, I know that you have a couple of businesses and you also, you speak at various schools and you have other programs that you're involved in. What have you seen anything, in your businesses related to COVID that have, made you have to alter the way that you are operating and how you've overcome that using a tactic from the military?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've had to refocus everything that we're doing, especially on the film side. As I do more consulting work and service work in the film business, there has been nothing. We've only just started going back to productions as of, a couple months ago. And even then, it's at about 20 or 30% of where it was just a year ago. I just finished a project out in the New York area, and the direct impact is how we interact with each other on a set. Now, many people have not been to a movie set. Some people have. Those that have know that there, can be anywhere between 200 and 600 people on a set at any given time or in various locations throughout a movie crew. So it's a huge grouping of people, and that's well outside of your director and your principal cast. Well, I deal directly with directors and cast members. I do a lot of production work, behind the scenes, but mainly I'm up there in front trying to make sure everyone looks great. Well, there's new rules in place where I can't even go up and, adjust an actor's weapon in a sling. I can't go up and adjust a uniform. There's nothing I can do with that actor without going through a series of COVID protocols to get to hands-on. And they even discourage it even as we go through those protocols. Every day we have to go through a questionnaire, a COVID written test. At the end of business, we have to document whether or not we felt ill or we're getting headaches or anything like that. And, take those hundreds of people and they're all put under a microscope daily. And we have, a check and balance that goes into making sure that, A, we're not getting sick, but in particular with, our actors on set. If you have a $25, $30 million actor and you give them COVID or her COVID, be ready for the lawsuit that's going to come. So I understand there's definitely protocols in place for what we do and how we do it now. That's part of that's directly affecting creativity. I mean, on the film side of this is a creative business at the end. So people have to work creatively with each other to come up with something cool. For me, I do a lot more stuff, on just like we did this job in New York. I would have to talk to the actor via our phones in between takes. So he'd have his phone in his pocket. I'd have my phone and we would talk and I'd say, look, adjust your thing to look like this. And I'd have one of my staff dressed up in an identical suit, whatever he was wearing, to make sure that he could make the adjustments. All right, I need you to walk like this. And I'd have my staff member walk like this, and then the actor would emulate. And it was tricky. We've never had to do that before.
Yeah, that is tricky. And that's another way I think that you can use that skill of adapting, though, that you said you learned in the military. And I think that's something.
Back to adapting.
I mean, I've experienced that here at Navy Federal. I mean, I really miss the in person and being creative and coming up with solutions or problem solving through, what kind of relief we're going to give members for COVID. That's not as easy to do when you have to call someone or set up a meeting or some, it's easier to do when you're with people. That's when the real creativity and, you just kind of start to get on a groove.
You hit the nail on the head. I've seen, the individual veteran on their own is powerful, but with vets getting groups and actually can hybridize and brainstorm, that's really when true power comes out. And it's true across the board with everyone that shares a creative vision, of course. But I work with groups of veterans, and I'm not just out here on my own doing my own thing. I work with a great, amazing support staff. I have people and networks all over the place. And when I run into a situation, I have people I can call. I can work through problems and talk about things. And it's interesting that how much we rely, even as veterans, on that face-to-face interpersonal connectivity, and to watch COVID erase all that. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, well, erase it, but maybe just find another way to get the job done,
For sure. I mean, look, it goes back to mission accomplishment. Yes, that is our primary goal. Can you be as effective in the COVID times? Yeah, I think you can get close. But I think we're all looking forward to those days when we go back to work and we can actually shake a hand and create those interpersonal bonds that make everything that much better. I think that we're an amazing species and we just work better together.
Right. Well, part of me thinks that if now more than ever, veterans are more well equipped to handle the stresses in the job market that a lot of people they haven't had these types of hardships enter their lives. And maybe the veterans can help the civilians that are in the workforce to overcome it.
Well, case in point, I know we probably crunch for time, but I witnessed numerous instances of veterans helping people with the COVID protocols, especially on donning and doffing equipment like masks and gloves. I mean, I can remember going through, every level of MOP training you could think of. And so, especially if you just boil it down to a boot camp scenario where everyone goes into the gas chamber, at some point you've been tear gas. You know how to put a gas mask on. You know how to take a gas mask off. You know how to put gloves on. You know how to take gloves off. I watched all these vets I don't even know what MOSs they all have, but they all knew how to take gloves on and off really well. And so they were going around to each crew member and helping them because, a lot of civilians on a movie set or in any corporate environment, I guess, haven't had to work an entire 12 or 14-hour period with gloves interfering with, their day-to-day. And yet in the military, that's just a common thing. So it was interesting to see that level of group help that was taking place with 60, 80 people learning that, oh, wait, you can't take gloves off like this? I didn't know that. And so I thought that was pretty spectacular.
Yeah, even the small things like that. So, we are a little bit crunch for time. Well, not crunch for time because, I could talk all day about this. But give me a cutoff time. So,
yes. I'm sorry.
Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to get out to, the veterans who are transitioning into civilian jobs?
I would say, like we had said earlier, there's many paths to the forest, right? So whether you decide as a veteran that you want to be the next big tech mogul or you want to just be an amazing, upper manager at McDonald's, all of this is great. And it depends on where you want to take yourself because not everyone's cut out to be an entrepreneur. It's tough. There's a lot of risk. The chances of going broke are pretty much, 90% certainty if you're in certain instances. So, there's all these different levels of why you should do something, why you shouldn't. So I say, look, follow your passion. If you're passionate about going into business for yourself, then you need to become an amazing duty expert in what you want to do and how you want to do it and learn from other veterans that are doing it. I always make my door open to people for mentorship because I believe that I've learned some interesting, valuable, costly lessons in my life. And I'm happy to share the pitfalls of that journey. It's funny
and
because
successes.
Successes too. But successes are great. But you have to successes are easy to navigate. Everyone's happy, right? You're making money. Everyone's having a great time. How you navigate the failures and the pitfalls, especially in today's COVID times, can really determine the ethical path you take as a business owner and even as an employee. And it can guide your future prosperity. There are great ways to navigate speed bumps, and there are really crappy ones. So I think that, veterans can learn from each other and how we navigate our way down that bumpy road. Because honestly, these days, at least for the interim, we're going to be down some bumpy roads.
Yeah. Who knows? Who knows what's going to get thrown at us next?
Yeah, for sure. We've had pestilence and, floods. We've had record hurricanes this year. What's next? What will we navigate next?
Maybe, I think on the East Coast, we're due for big snowstorms.
Oh, yeah, that's coming. I just saw it on the news. Yeah, you'll get that tonight.
No, I'm not prepared.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for, joining the podcast today. And I would be great to talk to you again about specifically entrepreneurs or veteran-owned businesses. I think that would be a really good topic to really get into, especially the experience that you've had.
Certainly, yeah, it's my pleasure. There's some real heavy meat and potatoes in a good veteran entrepreneur talk. So
yes, and some good beer, I heard too. Right?
Yes, our beer is quite good. It does. People do like it.
Gets the job done. COVID
has really put a damper on our beer making. Let me tell you, but we are looking forward to 2021 for sure. A little bit, we're gonna again, we have to improvise and adapt and overcome the crisis. So we're rebranding a little bit, but we're gonna have beer for the masses here pretty soon once again.
Very exciting. I'll have to make a trip up from Coronado next time I'm in town.
Always welcome.
If I make it through this blizzard that's coming tonight. I'm just kidding. So where can listeners find you?
Well, from you can go to our main corporate portal, which is thewarfightergroup.com, or if you're interested in just our beer, you can go to the Warfighter Brewing Company, and we can answer your questions there.
And for resources for veterans?
They can always call me direct. No.
They have to come buy beer.
They got it. Well, I tell you, those conversations are best had over a pint. So anytime they can reach out to me at any of our email addresses. Anyone that needs help with any questions they have in regards to work or entrepreneurship, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My numbers are public. My emails are public, and I'm happy to answer any questions. All
right. Well, thank you, Jon, so much for being on the podcast. And for those of you who are listening, and hopefully we'll talk soon. And for those of you who are listening, make sure you subscribe to Making Sense wherever you get your podcasts, and give us a rating, drop a comment, or email us at makingsense@NavyFederal.org. That's MakingCents @NavyFederal.org, where we're making your financial health our mission. Take care, Jon.
Thanks a lot. You too.
Navy Federal Credit Union is federally insured by the National Credit Union Administration. This podcast is intended to provide general information and shouldn't be considered legal, tax, or financial advice. It's always a good idea to consult a tax or financial professional for specific information on how certain laws may apply to your individual financial situation. References to and participation with the military community does not constitute organizational endorsement. Navy Federal is an equal housing lender.
Navy Federal Credit Union. Our members are the mission.